me try that one more time. Here you go. Everybody, welcome into Cover 4 Live, brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. I've also got the rest of the Dog Nation team with us here as well. Mike Griffith, Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel. A lot for us to get into over the course of the next few minutes. And guys, I guess let's begin with this. There's been a lot of speculation. In the absence of the Big Ten, the absence of the Pac-12 for this upcoming season, would there still be room for a college football playoff? The College Football Playoff Selection Committee has met this week and released statements today. In fact, we'll show you a quote here from Gary Barta from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee that we'll put up there on your screen. I won't read it word for word, but basically they have met. They know what their job is to do. They've got to select 4 teams, they say. So if the executive committee wants to move forward with the college football playoff, the committee says they'll do so. What's ironic about this, Mike Griffith, is that Barta, as the new selection committee chairman, is Iowa athletic director. So he very well could be a part of selecting a college football playoff that his university is not eligible to be a part of because the Big Ten is not playing this year. This is certainly strange news that the playoff is moving forward. I don't want to say strange, but it's at least interesting that the playoff is moving forward while 2 Power 5 conferences are not. But what do you make of the fact that the playoff has once again reasserted itself as ready to go if the powers that be actually want to have this playoff this year?
0 for 4.
Maybe we should stop muting all these mics at the start of the show. Maybe that's a fool's errand in retrospect.
Sorry about that, guys.
Hey, next week's another week to get it right. But we've all missed on one. Mike, now you're unmuted. Take it away.
Thanks, Connor. Yeah, I was saying we reported that yesterday. I talked to Bill Hancock, and we had a quote from him in that Dog Nation story about college football moving forward with these 3 conferences. And Bill told me they were still in planning for the playoffs down there in Miami in January 11th. So it's nice they made a public statement, but not a surprise. I mean, to me, it's a non-news story. Had they canceled the playoffs, then there's news. But it's business as usual. They're moving forward. Their task is to pick the 4 best teams. Bill had told us that on our show about a week and a half ago on a Monday with me that was going to be the plan, and until there was a different plan. And why would it be any different? You certainly wouldn't expand the playoffs right now. I did see there's some different models for spring football. I'm sure we can talk about that later in the show. But like I said, we had that on Dog Nation yesterday and in my story. So
we didn't have this quote. This quote wasn't made till this afternoon.
No. We talked to the guy that's the boss of it. We talked to Bill Hancock, who's the executive director. Barta's the rotational figurehead, but we talked to the executive director yesterday.
Well, good enough. Jeff, is it possible to have a playoff if you don't have 2 of the conference participating in it?
Okay, first of all, I got to laugh, Brandon, for just a little bit. Hopefully none of us will ever rise to the heights of our profession where we are called a rotational figurehead. That's just – nobody says I want to be a rotational figurehead when I grow up, right? I guess it would just seem like, I don't know, go back to 1912 because I guess that's what you have to do. And I'm sure they awarded national champions. I think Alabama was the consistent national champion from 1910 through 1920 by somebody's weekly reader poll or something like that. These are the teams that are fielding football teams. These are the schools that are fielding a team, and they're going to decide the champion amongst the schools that are bringing a team onto the field.
Connor, am I the only one that has a hard time believing this is actually still going to happen, though? It's one thing to say you're planning on doing it. It's one thing for Bill Hancock to say they're planning on doing it. It's another thing to actually do it. Somehow, some way, I think there's a very good chance SEC, ACC, Big 12 plays. I'm still suspicious of the idea they're going to have a college football playoff, though.
Yeah, I'd like to just see them sort of get the proverbial plane in the air, get these conference games underway and have those be played. And then if we get to week 6, 7 in the season where teams have played enough games, then we start talking about actually having a college football playoff. I will say, while, yes, the Big Ten has not traditionally done all that well, and the Pac-12 has been sort of non-existent in the college football playoff, especially in the title game discussion, I personally do think if Ohio State is not really competing this year in this college football playoff, I don't necessarily know how legitimate this playoff at the end of the season would be, even though there's a chance you could have, 3 of the 4 best teams in the country. But without Ohio State, I personally think that, the idea of a true college football playoff might be a little bit hollow this season.
What do you think about that, Mike?
I think it's hilarious. 18 out of the 24 playoff teams the last 6 years have come from conferences other than the Big Ten in the Pac-12. To Connor's point, Ohio State's made 3 appearances. those other 3 appearances have been scattered between Oregon, Michigan State, and another Big Ten or Pac-12 team. That Washington, I guess, would be the other one. So those are the 4 different schools over the last 6 years. And then you got the simple fact you've had an SEC team in the national championship game 15 times in the last 14 years. So you didn't hear me study. 15 SEC teams have competed in the last 14 national championship games. So Connor, I don't know what dictionary you used at Georgia, but that's not my definition of hollow.
Jeff, what were you going to say?
Yeah, here's something I just felt like jumping in here. I mean, at some point, don't you give credit to the universities and the schools and the programs that should we get to the point where they get to a championship and they facilitate and get this whole season down the track? At some point, I know that there will be, well, hey, maybe the best teams are not involved preseason into this playoffs, as everyone might expect. Ohio State's certainly worthy of that, but give some credit to the teams that made it through this season. And if they're allowed to crown a champion and they get to that point where somebody's got confetti falling on their faces, I think it's going to be a feat in and of itself for those schools that soldiered on through this.
Connor?
Well, I would just, with Ohio State, I think, do we all agree here they're one of the 4 best teams going into the season?
I would say on paper that appears to be true.
And I think if they had their way, if they got to make an individual decision, they'd probably align themselves with what the SEC wants to do. So them having that decision taken out of their hands, I do feel like maybe this isn't a sort of true national sort of championship year if this is the case that we're even going to end up having.
So there's no doubt that Georgia would fly a flag for this. Every school in the country would if they win the national championship. But would you have a problem with Georgia raising a flag in Sanford Stadium that says 2020 national champion if they won it this year, whether it's decided by some means other than the playoff or actually through the college football playoff, without Ohio State playing, which is obviously, I would say, the best of the teams that's not playing? Would you criticize Georgia for flying a flag?
No, because I think with what Dabo Swinney said yesterday, you still have to sort of go through the gauntlet of playing those teams, and especially within the SEC. We don't look at the Miami Heat's 2011, I believe, or 2012 title. There was a strike shortened year as sort of an asterisk by that. I think if the end result sort of justifies what we all want, and I think most people would agree that's a Clemson, an Alabama, and LSU, a Georgia sort of national champion, I think that's going to fly. But if it's, say, like a Notre Dame or sort of a lesser, non-traditional program or opponent in there, maybe then you start bringing up that asterisk talk.
I mean, Mike, let me bring you in on this, because would your feeling on this be different if instead of Ohio State not playing, it was Clemson not playing?
Yeah.
Clemson played for the title a year ago. They've won, I guess, 2 of the last 4 national championships, 2 of the last 3 national championships. This is a program that, I mean, they have been more of a part of the national championship story than any program in the last couple of years. For me personally, I believe this season you absolutely can crown a legitimate national champion, but I believe my tune would change if Clemson wasn't playing. Yeah,
I would say so. I mean, Ohio State made it last year and lost to the runner-up. I mean, that's just, that's one team out of 130. I can't say that, that things are hollow. First of all, if you win the SEC, I've heard it said it's tougher to win the SEC championship game than it is the national championship. There's probably a lot of truth to that when you take a look at some of these past SEC championship games. I certainly believe Georgia belonged in the college football playoff in 2018. Oklahoma got the bid, but I would say so. Now, granted, I still think the Big Ten is legit. I don't think there's another team that would have come out of the Big Ten other than Ohio State, though. I think they're in one of those conferences where they're just that much better than everybody else. So how deserving were they really? How deserving, whereas you come out of the SEC with playing a 10-game conference schedule in this league, and all you got to do is look at the draft numbers to recognize there's more talent and more physicality. All you got to do is look at, like I said, the fact you've had 15 SEC teams playing the last 14 national championship games. I think Ohio State's been there, three times in that, and out of those years going back to 2008. So I guess I don't put as much into Ohio State as some people. Having covered the Big Ten, I watched Michigan State beat Urban Meyer 2 out of 3 years. So just because they've had talent doesn't mean they can finish the job. And I don't think there's anything hollow about it. If these kids are willing to work and willing to take this risk and go through what they're going through, you can be the one, Connor, that stands in front of Kirby and tells him how hollow his championship is. I'm not going to do it. So
here's what I predict is going to happen this season, Jeff. If the fall team's crowned a national champion, you better believe the spring, assuming that it takes place, you better believe the spring teams are also crowning their own national champion as well. This could really feel like one of those ancient years where you've got about 17 different teams that are claiming some sort of stake in a national championship. And we'll get more into the viability of a spring season later on. But if it does happen, you better believe that somebody's going to try to get themselves a championship ring out of that.
Yeah, kind of the beauty I see here, Brandon, is it's college football. And how many times have we heard that's why you play the games? I mean, a year ago, if we were sitting here sounded smart and looking dapper on a cover four show, nobody, I think even Brandon was touting them, but nobody was thinking that LSU was going to be the juggernaut they were a year ago and that beast of a national championship. And the other thing that you brought to mind is the second thing. I don't know how the other conferences, if they play in the spring, how they can call themselves a national champion. I mean, at least you got 3/5 of the Power Five here still functioning and operating and not 2/5.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. A lot of folks checking in, watching some video right now. Some folks not obviously believing much in Ohio State. Clay Dykes, though, who was, by the way, with us last night for our Inside the Huddle event, he says, let's go get that championship. And I have to say, speaking as a fan here, I would be okay with Georgia calling itself national champion if it won this season. I know that Big Ten fans would disagree to the extent that there are, Pac-12 fans that we'd hear from. I know they disagree with that too. This is one of those moments, though, where I think you've just sort of got to, make your case and move on and understand that in the event these three leagues do move forward and have a season, some folks will disagree with it. But, frankly, what they think probably doesn't matter to me all that much.
BA, can I run down some numbers for you? I just
Please.
looked this up. This was a simple Google. I decided to look up, since Connor says it's a hollow national title. There's no parade without Ohio State. I look and I see that Ohio State's 1-3 all time against Alabama. They are 1-0 against Arkansas. They're 0-1 against.
Yeah, but they're 1-0 in playoff games against Alabama.
They're 0-1 against Georgia. They're 1-0 against Kentucky. They're 1-1 against LSU. They're 0-2 against South Carolina. They're 0-1 against Tennessee. If you want to look at Ohio State versus the SEC in bowl games, they're 2-10. So the hollow talk that's just the wrong word for it.
Mike, what's Alabama's record against Ohio State in the college football playoffs?
Are you going back to 2015? Are you going back to 2015?
You're going back way further than that by bringing up past results. When was the last time Georgia even played Ohio State?
1992.
I think they beat them in a city. They beat them in a bowl game.
Yeah, 1992.
Citrus Bowl.
Kirk Herbstreit was the quarterback back. I don't think Connor was born then, was he?
No,
Connor, you weren't born.
So what does that have to do with this season? What is Georgia playing?
What does it got to do? I don't know. What has it got to do with this season? You're telling me how good they're going to be based on what? 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? They don't have the same players. They lost their best running back. They lost receivers. They lost the best defensive end in college football. How can you say that team that couldn't beat Clemson last year would beat a better Clemson team this year?
How is Clemson better this year? They lost a bunch of their best receivers too.
Because they bring back their best players, their quarterback, their running back.
We may have to leave this argument for here. I mean, be that as may, Ohio State is still the number 2 team in the coaches poll, so it's not right. But my point is, it's not a huge leap to say they're one of the preseason 4 best teams in the country when they're ranked 2 in the preseason.
I absolutely agree with you, Brandon. I absolutely agree that Ohio State is one of the best 4 teams going into the season. But a lot can happen. And to take an entire offseason away and an entire football season of a team that can find its way through the Southeastern Conference, 10-game league schedule, through a playoff, and in the end go, well, it's just hollow because Ohio State's not here, is, there's 129 other teams. Now, they're probably the best team of the lot that's not here. But right now, I believe we still have 76 teams. And if you win a national championship amid this COVID-19 crisis, I absolutely do not think hollow is a way that you could describe it.
We'll have to leave that part of the discussion right here. It's Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. That's Mike Griffith. My name's Brandon Adams. Good to have all of you with us. Jeff Sintel, Connor Riley as well. A lot of folks watching on Facebook and YouTube right now. We'll continue to take your comments about all of that. And as I said before, we're proud to be presented tonight by our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau with offices in nearly every county in the state. Georgia Farm Bureau agents live, work, and play in your community and others like it right here in our great state, providing all Georgia communities and serving all Georgia communities through important local agricultural programs, offering affordable home, auto, and life insurance protection with agents, volunteers, and members in every community in the state. Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. You can find them online at gfbinsurance.com. That's right. Make sure you check them out today. gfbinsurance.com. All right. I want to move on here on Cover 4 presented by Georgia Farm Bureau and talk about what's expected to happen this upcoming week. as Georgia's expected to be on the practice field. There've been some ACC teams that have been already going through the paces. A lot of Big Ten teams got taken off the practice field when the announcement was made to postpone their upcoming season. But if everything goes according to plan, Georgia will be out there doing that on Monday. In a normal year, we'd already be talking about a lot of this kind of stuff. Georgia will be well into its summer camp, getting ready for the start of the upcoming season. But we expect that now to begin, and Georgia heads towards a late September start for the upcoming season. A lot of unanswered questions still with Georgia, even if you disqualify coronavirus as a current topic for this discussion. Connor, if I were to ask you, what is the biggest unanswered question still awaiting Georgia as it moves into its summer camp that we expect to start on Monday?
The biggest question for me is what impact does bringing students back onto campus have sort of on the team and the effect on just the potential of opening more doors. Classes start for Georgia next Thursday, August 20th. And that's, I think, one of the two big things, the SEC in particular is waiting to see what that impact has on teams, and the potential spikes that could happen there. And then how the NFL handles it. I think those are the two sort of big questions for me anyway, in terms of getting a season on track and starting on time on September 26th.
But how about with the team on the field itself? What are you still looking at? Assuming that if we just pretended for a second the coronavirus doesn't exist, what's interesting to you about the camp itself?
I mean, it's got to be the quarterback competition and specifically sort of the reps breakdown between Jamie Newman, JT Daniels, and how those sort of first team reps with all the guys sort of work out. Because on the one hand, you do want to have a guy is going to be that starter for the first game, but given the possibility that someone could get COVID and they could come into contact with someone with COVID and miss 14 days, you have to have viable options back there. And sort of how those reps get split up and how the pecking order, I think, separates itself is just as interesting to me as who ends up winning that job.
Jeff, can I tell you this? That because I expected quarterbacks to come up here, and obviously I'm sure we'll talk about them a lot during this portion of the show. But my biggest unanswered question for Georgia is not the quarterbacks. And it's not because I didn't want quarterback to be the answer. I honestly believe that Georgia has a bigger unanswered question than quarterback, and I'll try to explain my reasoning on that. But what do you think about what Connor just said and kind of how that may factor into your own big unanswered question for Georgia on the field right now?
Well, I guess it's two ways to look at it, Brandon. There's the headlines that everybody wants to see and that they will click. And then there's the actual nuances and nature of this football team. I think Georgia is going to have an all-SEC type quarterback. I think Kirby Smart basically guaranteed that with bringing in JT Daniels and him becoming immediately eligible. I want to know what the offensive line looks like. I want to know who the number 2 receiver is. I know those aren't glamorous things. I want to know basically who becomes your left and right tackle. I think those are all more glaring issues for this football team. I want to hear some good things about Jared Zirkle launching kicks into orbit as a steady and a reliable place kicker. And I want to see just how the early weeks of camp phase out and how much praise that Kirby Smart will dole out to guys like Nolan Smith and Lewis Seen in their second season of the program, where he feels like he can give them a little bit more shine.
So we asked for one question. Jeff gave us 9. But nonetheless, I want to push back on something that you said there. You said both left and right tackle. I thought we were all of the very strong assumption that Jamari Salyer is the left tackle on this team. Is that really an unanswered question for you? Because I would not – I mean, listen, I obviously don't know for a fact. These are all just assumptions. But my strong assumption has been that Salyer is going to be the left tackle. Is that still an unanswered question in your mind?
No, I just want to see him go out there and do it. I want to see him show at 320 pounds how good he can look at left tackle, because then that will solve a lot of the right tackle issues. Because – first team and second team left tackle is not naturally your right tackle as your backup left tackle. I just want to see, I think we're talking about assumptions. I think should the season be played and go forth and marry, I think by the end of the year, most people will be talking about Jamari Salyer as the best offensive lineman on the Georgia team.
Yeah, I would expect that to maybe be true as there as well. Mike, how about for you?
Wow. I kind of want to see what the offense looks like. I do think Jamie Newman is front and center. And it's funny, I talked with the Hall of Fame sports information director, Claude Felton, today. I said, hey, Claude, man, can we get a picture of Jamie in a Georgia uniform? I mean, we are just – Wake Forest is just going – they just ran another picture of him in a Wake Forest. I'm just – good grief. Can we just get a picture of Jamie Newman in a Georgia football uniform? It's August 14th. The guy's been on campus for 8 months. And Claude says, we can't even get in there. And he said, besides, why y'all want, and he was being funny. Why y'all want a picture of Jamie, he ain't played a snap yet. And I said, well, who has it? You want to start writing about Carson, or you want to start writing about who are you? Carson Beck hasn't played a snap. Dwan Mathis hasn't played a snap. We're gonna start writing about Stetson Bennett. Come on, get us a picture of. Of course, it's going to be Jamie Newman, right? JT Daniels is not even cleared yet, and that we know that. And listen, even if Dwan is having a great fall, which he is, even if Carson Beck may ultimately have the highest ceiling, which I personally think he does before all is said and done with these careers 10 years from now when we look back. Right now, Jamie Newman is the tried and true guy. You brought him in. And what does the offense look like, BA? That's my question. And I wrote about that earlier. Aaron Murray, who's obviously SEC's all-time leading passer. But let me tell you, this guy's a great analyst. And he brought up the issues that Jamie's had with intermediate passes. And when you start talking about air raid offense, you're talking about spread the field and intermediate routes. And does Jamie Newman have that? If not, then you alter the scheme to fit what Jamie does well. So how does the offense look is my biggest question about the fall.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a good point. I want to get into my own answer to this question in a minute, but let me stay on the quarterback topic here for a moment. I think it's really interesting that if you look at some of the things that JT Daniels did well in 2018, it was not a perfect season from USC in 2018, but some of the things that he did well on short and intermediate throws, it certainly seems like that was a very comfortable spot for Daniels to find himself in. And frankly, on the bigger, deeper throws, that wasn't always a strength for Daniels, even against, especially if you want to highlight the best competition they played. Daniels had a great game, for instance, against Wake Forest that season. Against Fresno State that season. But when I get all these quarterbacks confused.
Same thing.
Wake Forest. Yeah, Wake Forest, Fresno State. But against the better competition, big, deep throws, not always something that JT Daniels did. Ironically, almost the exact opposite was true for Jamie Newman a year ago, where, as Pro Football Focus has said over and over again, he excelled on the deep throws, was not always great on easy throws, which you would think of as clean pocket, standing back there, chance to dump off and make an easy completion. Not always able to do that. Now, was that because he didn't have anybody to throw to in routes like that, or was it because of something else? We may not ever know that for sure, but it is really interesting how opposite the profile of both these players are. But I really believe the missing piece for Georgia, and I'll let anybody who wants to respond to this, because Georgia itself is so deficient on long passes, I mentioned this today, ranked very low on completions of 20 or plus yards a season ago. Knowing that that's something that Newman is good at, boy, inserting that into the Georgia offense before you get into any kind of like Todd Monken metamorphosis or Jamie Newman also uses his legs, just someone who is accurate, willing to throw the deep ball, connected on some really big throws for Wake Forest, 4 completions of more than 59 yards last season, as a for instance on this. Seeing that component of the Georgia offense is one of the reasons why I've always kind of favored Jamie Newman as the potential starter here.
Yeah, Aaron Murray brought up the fact that, bigger guys like a Jamie Newman, a 6'4", 230, strong guy, like a Tim Tebow even. He brought up the tightness in the trapezoid and kind of brought up the physiological breakdown of why Jamie would have some trouble with the touch throws as opposed to the deep throws. And, I thought Jake Fromm threw a great ball to Tyler Simmons, would have gone 70 yards if the guy doesn't drop it. So you got to have receivers that can catch it too before you throw it. And unfortunately, Georgia's receiving core was pretty poor and inconsistent last year. But I do think this year now that you've added to Jermaine Burton's, great news, by the way, earlier this week, Dominic Blaylock getting cleared. This is something that got to give props to Connor. He's predicted this the entire offseason. I had my questions, and Connor Riley was absolutely right about Dominic being a fast healer and being a part of this offense. It certainly looks like, Connor's prediction is going to come to fruition. So you got Dominic Blaylock back in the mix now. He looks like, to me, he would be your leading contender as the number 2. But then you bring up Jermaine Burton, another potential flyer. You bring up Justin Robinson, a big guy, big target, wins the 50-50 ball. Is Demetrius Robertson healthy? So, BA, to your point, I do think they're going to be able to stretch the field vertically more with Jamie Newman and some of these young receivers.
So, Jeff, let me make a case, though, for why I believe that quarterback is not the biggest unanswered question for Georgia. I'll let you poke holes in it and anybody else who wants to. If you look at the quarterback situation for a moment, I have said now for many, many weeks that I do favor Jamie Newman to win that job. But if what I view as the number 2 option, because he has experience, JT Daniels, if he wins that job, I think I'm probably still okay. Maybe it's not exactly what I'm looking for because, as I've said, I really loved Newman's ability to throw deep. But JT Daniels, the guy that started at USC, that's a pretty good option for you to have if that's your number 2 option, then you're really good shape. Compare that to right tackle for a moment, where I'm hoping to find a good starter, and there's a really good chance that Georgia does, but not a guarantee. I don't feel nearly as good about Georgia's number 2 option at right tackle, whoever it is, whether it's Truss, whether it's McClendon, whether it's the freshman Broderick Jones, whether it's, you want to keep Owen Condon as part of this discussion, or, anybody else you want to bring up here. I'm not sure I really know much, feel much, can confidently say much about Georgia's number 2 right tackle the same way I could about JT Daniels, who I believe is Georgia's number 2 quarterback. That's why, for me, right tackle is a more important topic, unanswered question-wise, than quarterback would be, because if Georgia's deficient at right tackle, that's a domino that could potentially topple everything along that offensive line. You don't end up getting that group up front to perform the way that you want to. So right tackle is not as interesting as quarterback, but in terms of unanswered questions, I believe it's a more pivotal one for Georgia right now.
Yeah, Brandon, let's go back and do a quick taste test, okay? I want you to think about the last time right tackle was a contested job at the University of Georgia, and that would be Isaiah Wilson climbing into that spot as a redshirt but an unproven freshman for the 2018 season. How do you feel about the guys there now compared to what Georgia brought to bear with Sam Pittman when Isaiah Wilson was going to be the guy and he was the wire-to-wire starter in 2018? How do you feel about that?
I probably would have felt better about Wilson going into 2018 because he had been on campus for a year, because Kirby had said some very complimentary things about Wilson, getting in shape, acclimating himself to college life. Kirby previewed Wilson's emergence by some of the stuff that he said in summer camp. Now, this is a different kind of summer. We haven't had a chance to hear from Kirby on that. Maybe he eventually praises one of the guys that I just mentioned, and therefore I'm a little bit more, speaking as a fan here, a little bit more comfortable with them in that spot. But Wilson was a former 5-star who had a year on campus. Broderick Jones, in this case, is a former 5-star who just showed up. McClendon and Truss, while they were very highly rated recruits, not quite as highly rated as Isaiah Wilson. So my memory of how I felt in 2018 was I thought Georgia would probably be fine with Wilson. I assume that Georgia will be okay with whichever guy ends up selecting at right tackle, because they're all seemingly pretty good choices. But I wouldn't say I have as much confidence I would have had about Wilson going back to 2018.
Well, I would say there that the differences between those two is just Isaiah Wilson is 6'7" and 335 pounds and looks like an agile, graceful athlete. I think that's the difference. But if you're looking at technically polished and proficient blockers, I would think that, a lot of names pop up there. Georgia would have a Tate Ratledge, who I think is more an eventual guard, kind of like Isaiah Wilson in the NFL. I think you got to remember, I remember seeing Warren McClendon go mano a mano against all the big guys at the opening at that camp. And a lot of Warren McClendon's high school reps and high school film at elite events looked as good as or comparable to Isaiah Wilson. The thing there is he just wasn't, that monstrous size there that you see out of McClendon. Don't forget Xavier Truss as well. And I also still really like Broderick Jones there amongst all those names.
So, Connor, let me bring you on this because you obviously remember the 2017 season. That was a year in which Andrew Thomas plays right tackle. Before that year was done, Kirby had already said he's going to be left tackle next year. And that's a very unusual thing for Kirby Smart to do, to look at a guy and basically proclaim him a starter at a different position for the following year. But that's how good things were with Andrew Thomas. 0 people were worried about him moving to left tackle. Everyone knew he'd be fine. That's another thing that, Isaiah Wilson kind of borrows some of his confidence that 2018 season. Jamari Salyer may be a very good player if he indeed is Georgia's left tackle this year, but you're not quite as solid at left tackle as you would have been in 2017 turning to 2018, which is another reason for me to have a little bit more questions about that right tackle spot as well.
Right, and they don't have a backup answer at left tackle either, but it wouldn't totally surprise me if, given the comfort we saw with Jamari Salyer there at right tackle a year ago, and maybe that's just what they want to do, potentially move him to that right tackle spot and say, hey, maybe that left tackle spot might be a little bit, the same sort of thing. But the reality is, at both tackle spots, I believe they have one career start of anyone on the Georgia roster, and that's Salyer in the Sugar Bowl. So it's a very valid point to bring up that right tackle spot in particular, especially with Broderick Jones coming off an injury, what that looks like and what that competition and how it plays out in camp. I don't expect that sort of position to be solidified and solid even going into the season, even with the extended camp.
Mike, can I give you a positive themed unanswered question? Because a lot of times we say unanswered question, it's a thing you might be worried about as a fan. Who's your quarterback going to be? Who's your right tackle going to be? Can I give you a positive tinged unanswered question?
I think so. Yeah, go ahead.
Here's my unanswered question with the Georgia defense. And I talked about this a few days ago on Dog Nation Daily. And Jeff, Connor, I'd love for you to weigh in this too, but I want Mike to do it first. What are the chances that Jordan Davis is about to become not just a run-stopping nose tackle, but an interior presence pass rush guy? NFL draft scouts seem to view that as a possibility. He did have 2.5 sacks a year ago, which tied him for second with, I think, 5 other players maybe, tied him for second for the team lead there. This is a guy, I saw a picture of him the other day, looks to be in really good shape. I think he played at a very big weight last year in pretty good overall shape. If Jordan Davis becomes more than just the space-eating, run-stopping nose guard, but the interior defensive line, similar to what maybe Javon Kinlaw was for South Carolina, not as good. I won't even ask him to be quite what Kinlaw was a year ago, but if he's similar to the profile that Kinlaw showed as a player last year, boy, that's a big boost for this Georgia defense. And I think there's a chance it happens, that Jordan Davis is just more than a nose guard. He is what the SEC seems to produce better than any other league. Guys that can stop the run, but are also interior pass rush threats at a much, much higher clip. That's my positive question here. Is there a chance that we could start seeing some of that? You don't really see that during summer camp, but could you see that during the season from Davis this season?
I mean, that's predicated on the other team's game plan. I mean, that's predicated on if they double team them. It depends on if they roll the pocket. It depends on how quick they get rid of the ball. One thing that's not going to happen is Kirby's not going to turn these guys loose and tell them to start doing spin moves and get out of your lane. You know, one of the reasons why Georgia led the nation in rush defense is gap integrity. And that means that as you rush, you stay in your rush lane. You don't venture off because you want to be selfish, you want to get the sack. You have to maintain your gap integrity, and they build a wall. So a lot of times who gets the tackle is predicated on how the other team blocks the scheme or where the quarterback decides to go. Jordan Davis is certainly capable of making those plays if a quarterback is dumb enough to stand in the middle of the pocket with a 380-pounder coming at him that's being single block. But most teams recognize what a force that he is, and they double team him. If not a guard center, some sort of combo block, the running back will be there to pick him up if somehow Jordan gets through there. So those defensive line numbers are always misleading because it's so predicated on how the offense blocks. Now, that's why you see the elite pass rushers gets moved around a little bit, because then they can kind of dictate the offense. Well, geez, if they're just going to move this guy, Chase Young, they don't know what side he's going to line up on. Baylor had a guy that was an elite pass rush specialist. They decided to use him against Cade Mays. He got 2 sacks. They found the weak spot. So I think it's predicated more on the scheme, but your point about Jordan Davis evolving into, a top 2, second, third round pick, very valid. I think that's the difference with this Georgia football team from even 2017 is I think they have a championship line.
Connor, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been someone who's been sort of touting, if Jordan Davis develops as a pass rusher, he could potentially be, I think, a top 10 pick in the sense that he is so important, as Mike just highlighted, for what Georgia does in its run defense. And if he
in the SEC, you have to do that.
Absolutely. Like that is still, regardless of what he does as a pass rusher this year, him stopping the run is still the most important thing. But
I agree.
You mentioned Javon Kinlaw earlier. I'll bring up another guy sort of similar to that is Derek Brown. And you look at the success Auburn had against LSU last year. Now, yes, LSU still had over 500 yards of offense in that game, but I believe Auburn was the only team to hold them under 30. And knowing what we know Georgia essentially tried to copy Auburn's game plan that they ran against them in that game. If Davis develops into that pass rusher, which he very well potentially could, he was very good as a freshman, got even better as a sophomore. And if he is able to mesh that pass rushing acumen with, as Mike pointed out, while still maintaining and being a dominant run stopper, one, we're talking, I think, about Davis as one of the best players in the country. And two, I think that makes Georgia's defense and just sort of the gap integrity thing that Mike brought up. If he's doing that and wreaking havoc from there, that opens up things for Azeez Ojulari, Trayvon Walker, Nolan Smith. It opens up things for everyone else in the defense.
Jeff, before I let you respond, you'll get a kick out of this. Anthony Spano, watching us on YouTube, says, wait a second, is BA talking about somebody other than a 5-star? Yeah, in this particular case, I am, because that's how good of a player I think that Davis has a chance to be for Georgia. I think he's greatly exceeded his recruiting profile. But let me kind of change it up a little bit. And, Jeff, you can say whatever you want to say. But if I said we expect incremental growth to happen for a lot of these Georgia defensive players, but a Davis is a guy that I see as a candidate for exponential growth, more than just taking a next step. He takes actually a leap this upcoming season. Who's your guy defensively that would be true for that? Georgia needs more sacks. They need more tackles for loss. Great defenses are also impactful behind the line of scrimmage. Who's the guy that does that if it's not Davis? Maybe your name is Davis, but who's the guy that makes that exponential leap this season?
See, Brandon, that's where I'm going to differ with you on this one, man. My name has never been Davis here. I think Davis is what he is. When I've seen Davis, I'm echoing what a lot of folks have said here so far, is that he just needs to be that run stopper. He just needs to be the guy that holds it down. For the longest time, I've looked at Daron Payne and his career arc at Alabama as to what I think Jordan Davis could be, should be, and will be at Georgia. Daron Payne, guys, if you guys remember what a force he was in the middle of that 2017 Alabama defense, probably one of the big reasons why Georgia doesn't have that natty right now, because he really did handle Lamont Galliard in that game. Daron Payne, his best years at Alabama were about 50 tackles, about 3 tackles for loss, and about 1 sack. That was still good enough for him to get into the. They just Jordan Davis to be what he is a behemoth. And the reason why I think he'll have a great year at doing even better at what he has already done is because it's a maturity. You always look to the SEC offensive line and defensive lines, and whichever is more of those 20, 21-year-old juniors, seniors going against some of these 18, 19-year-old 5-stars, that's the team that has the edge. So I hope that I've successfully answered your Jordan Davis leap year question or not.
Well, who is your guy to take a leap?
Hold on, man. I got it for you right now. Swiftly and succinctly. And none of you other dudes are probably going to name this guy, but I'm going to throw him out there. My guy for the biggest leap year on the Georgia defense. Everybody knows what's coming with Lewis Cine. I think the biggest X factor for Georgia with improved play is going to be Tyreek Stevenson. I think he is going to have a tremendous year for Georgia.
That's really
holy
interesting.
moly. We got us a ball player, Dan Lanning said last spring, but holy moly, he didn't have his nose in the playbook. The guy that's going to make the leap is Trayvon Walker. He is the captain. I mean, he is the superstar. He is the Derek Brown. He is the big, fast, strong pass rushing guy that you guys are looking for. Jordan Davis is that space eater, again, gap integrity, but Trayvon Walker to me is an incredible specimen. That's who I'm investing in right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Connor.
I also have quite a bit of stock in Trayvon Walker since I've seen him playing kickoff coverage. I'll give you a sort of different.
But that's like talking about Apple stock right now. I didn't mention Trayvon Walker. He's obvious.
I'm
a leap year.
Well, wait a minute. Tyreek Stevenson was a borderline 5-star. So I'm going to go sort of similar to both you guys. Second-year players. I'm going to go Jermaine Johnson here, a guy who battled injuries a little bit last year, but the coaching staff really likes what he's able to do, and especially in the front seven, he's able to move around and do a lot of different things. I think it'll be very interesting to see how Georgia gets him onto the field this year, but I think he's a guy in his second year and last year at Georgia as he came in from the JUCO ranks. Now that he's got his feet under him a little bit, he, even more so than Nolan Smith and Azeez Ojulari, he is just a totally different athlete than some of those guys. Cody
Taylor, by the way, agrees on Trayvon Walker. By the way, we're going to pause this conversation for here. It's Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. My name is Brandon Adams. It's Mike Griffith. It's Jeff Sintel. It's Connor Riley. We do this every Thursday at 6 p.m., brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau, talking Georgia football, the news of the day. We look forward to doing this throughout the rest of the season there as well. With that in mind, let me move on here and talk about what we're about to see. I thought there was a chance we'd begin today's show by potentially talking about a brand new schedule for the SEC. I thought it might come this week. Ross Bjork, the Texas A&M AD, has looked ahead to the future. He gives us a little bit of a hint when this may come down. This is an interesting quote from Bjork, who talked to the Texas A&M podcast here, like the official podcast on this. He says we have to assume that when it comes to the schedule, everything for this year for the SEC just starts over. You're going to try to protect some traditional rivalries, maybe at the end of the season for those games, but it just may not be possible depending on how everything shakes out. He says, I don't think you have that schedule by the end of this week. And he said that just here recently, so that means right now. But Bjork predicts maybe sometimes next week we could have a full calendar of the dates. So Ross Bjork says maybe next week we could get the full, newly updated SEC schedule that provides dates for the 10 conference games we know that Georgia is going to play. So with that in mind, let's talk about who you hope that Georgia plays on week 1. Jeff, do you have a preferred opponent for Georgia to begin this season?
Well, I guess I'm going to have to just go with the 4-foot putt here. What's the biggest way to thumb the nose maybe not thumb the nose, but to celebrate your passion for football? Why not just make Georgia, Alabama week 1, man? That would be a gangbuster start. You can't really, I don't want Florida in that slot. I don't want South Carolina revenge game in that slot. I don't really want Mississippi State in that slot or Arkansas in that slot and some Pittman hosts his old team. I don't want any of that. I think if you could get Georgia, Alabama week 1, can you imagine how physical and spirited those practices would be? And, just from a competitive standpoint, I think more Georgia people would want to get that first crack at Alabama in September, well, late September, rather than play them twice in the span of maybe 6 or 7 weeks later in the year.
That's a pretty good point. I want to come back to that. Mike, what's your answer, though?
I think you want Alabama in week 2. I think you want them early, like Jeff said, but ideally just for your offense, you want to have a game under your belt. I think you want to beat up Mike Leach. I think you want to welcome Mike Leach to the SEC. It's going to take some time for that pass game to get into sync. That would be their first game. Can you imagine that salty veteran Georgia defense against the Mississippi State team playing that wide open Mike Leach style the very first time out in Sanford Stadium, whether there's 20,000 fans or no fans? It's a home game. So I'm going to go with Mississippi State, and I want Alabama the second week of the season.
I think it's actually a pretty interesting answer to the question, and I want to come back to some of what Mike says there too. Connor, how about you?
If we're going for the easiest possible game and the biggest win to sort of, as Mike points out, to get that confidence up early, especially if Alabama, like I think we all do think might be an early season game, the answer is Vanderbilt for week 1, because I believe that is a home game this year. And, we joked last week on Cover 4 on Friday, the over-under for Arkansas is about half a win. I think the over-under for Vanderbilt might be 1 win.
Yeah.
But I'm actually going to agree with Jeff and say I want Alabama week 1. One, because I know Mike Griffith is going to think that the SEC is setting up Georgia to fail by putting them up against a team like Alabama in week 1. But I think let's at least just try and make sure that if those games are going to happen, let's make make sure the Alabama game happens, make sure the biggest games happen. That way we at least have something to talk about from that standpoint. 2, you have a ton of time to prepare for Alabama. And granted, while it's an unknown what sort of Georgia might look like, I think that's both an advantage and disadvantage on the field. And finally, this is a point Jeff made, but you have sort of the whole season to sort of, if that is a loss, to sort of put that behind you and say we are a radically different team and we are on December 19th than we were on September 26th.
That point, Connor, I think is really important, and Jeff did touch on this. Mike, that if we're going to assume the high likelihood of a rematch between these two teams, so much better for that rematch to come after almost a full season's been played, whether it's week 1, as Jeff suggests, Connor agrees, or you say week 2, much better for a rematch to kind of bookend the season, beginning and end, as opposed to you play very late in the year, you turn back around a couple of weeks later, and you have to play that game again. Also, I'll say selfishly speaking, as a Georgia fan, I believe Alabama's better near the end of the season than they are near the beginning, because I believe that Bryce Young's a better quarterback by the end of the season. I think He might even be the starter the first time these two teams play, but I believe he almost certainly will be the starter, barring injury and COVID or whatever else, come December for the SEC championship. But even beyond that, I just think it makes more sense in a year in which you think a rematch is possible, better to play Alabama early to kind of, wet your whistle to play them again come December.
Yeah, in this case,
Brandon,
it worked out pretty good for Georgia in 2017 with Auburn. They played them pretty recent. But in this case, I think Georgia's offense will be vastly different from the at the end of the year than it is at the beginning of the year.
Jeff, what are you going to say?
Yeah, I'm just going to say this, and I'm not trying to say this for comedic theater, but just reality. I want to make sure Georgia and Alabama play this year, and that's why I want them playing in week 1.
But that is my reasoning for my opponent. It's not Alabama. I want Georgia and Florida to play week 1, because if there is gosh forbid that there is a season that's not able to be finished, I got a score to settle still with Florida after all this offseason.
No, you got to beat Alabama. You got to get the Alabama win.
No, that's not true.
No,
that's 6-1 in a row with Florida.
That's not true.
Into the game.
Hey,
what has poor Dad Mullen done to you lately, man? What's the latest crime?
Listen, Georgia has not fully graduated yet from the notion that Florida is still a big game, especially when you see all the offseason chatter. The offseason chatter about these SEC matchups has not been really much related to Georgia and Alabama. That's a big game for Georgia fans that has not gotten the attention of regional media, national media, things like that. But there have been plenty of people, Jordan Rodgers, Reese Davis, all these people who've touted the possibility that this is Florida's year. I think that Georgia's got one more opportunity to shut that talk up and, frankly, send Dan Mullen. I'm not saying he'd get fired on the basis of this year, but the brand that Mullen has built as a tutor of quarterbacks. Well, if Georgia has the better quarterback, that doesn't work anymore. If Georgia has the better offense, Mullen has the offensive genius. That doesn't work anymore. Georgia's still got a lot at stake against Florida. If you told me I could only see one game for Georgia this season, would I want it versus Florida or would I want it against Alabama? I'd want the game to be played against Florida. I'm a traditionalist. I love Georgia-Florida cocktail party in, that Halloween weekend type area. But in a year like this, where there are going to be very few fans, if any, involved in the game, then give me it on a radically different date. Give it to me week one. Let's see who really is the best, who the sharpest coach is that can prepare his team, get them ready for the first week. In a year in which I'm not guaranteed to get a full season, you better give me the Gators because I got another pelt I got to put on the wall here.
He needs those. Go ahead, Jeff.
Brendan, I love you, buddy, but I think you're out over your skis a little bit here, man. I think you're the only person on this feed right now that would say that a Florida victory again, beating Florida again, would mean more than getting Alabama and getting off that schneid and establishing yourself as a true college football titan.
I'll counter that though and say if you beat Alabama but then lose to Florida, that I feel like undoes a lot of the work you did by beating Alabama, quite frankly.
Well, then you could say lose to Florida but beat Alabama twice, and that's still the same thing.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that would make it more hollow for sure.
But
if you beat Alabama and lose to Florida, no.
But let me give you this scenario. And look, maybe you have to be a fan to think this way, but this is the way that I think. I'm operating from the standpoint of if you're telling me Georgia's going to play all 10 games, then at a certain point it kind of doesn't matter to me. But if I'm dealing with the unknown risk of not getting a full season, beating Florida without playing Alabama, to use Mike's word and Connor's word about hollow, beating Florida not playing Alabama in a way is not all that hollow because Georgia's backstory with Alabama right now is not as deep and rich as it currently is with Florida. And a lot of this has been established by media forces outside, the Dog Nation bubble. But if Georgia beats Alabama and doesn't get to play Florida, it's an entire year's worth of, well, it doesn't matter that you beat Alabama. We were going to beat you anyway had we been able to play that game because of how smart Dan Mullen is and how great he is at tutoring quarterbacks. I know we didn't get to see this because of coronavirus, and I'm obviously speaking, hypothetically here. But that's a narrative that I think a lot of Georgia fans do want to shut up. End the talk of Mullen as a genius. That's why I don't want to play the game week one. Jeff and then Connor.
Yeah, I'm just going to tout the opinion here from Joel Moody, and I want you guys to share in on this. He just says, and this would be SEC conspiracy theorist theater right here. Joel says, why don't we just play Florida and Bama back-to-back and set the tone? If Georgia wins those, 2 games.
I want Mike's take on this first. I want Mike's take on this first.
I think it's Florida and Georgia is a regional rivalry. Listen, you've lost to Alabama on the national stage. Georgia has bypassed Florida. This talk is you're overthinking it, man. They're way too much in your head. On the national scale, nobody puts Dan Mullen on Kirby Smart's level. This is all regional. It's not national. If you want to know, Georgia's turned into the singing frog on the national stage in the national championship. Kirby got out coached by Nick Saban in the second half, and it happened again on the national stage in the SEC title game. Florida, Georgia, all those years, Florida, Spurrier was beating Georgia. He was beating everybody. It wasn't just Georgia. He was beating Tennessee. Tennessee takes it personal too. Everybody got broken up with this hot girlfriend. Everybody felt the pain of the Florida Gators in the 1990s. This Georgia, everybody thinks, no, Georgia's past it. You're above this, man. Start thinking like a champ, BA. Get out of this muck that you're in with Florida and think about Bama and titles.
Well, first of all, I'm not the one that's playing, so it doesn't really matter how I think about it necessarily. But in terms of what people are saying about Georgia and Florida, there are plenty of people who pick the Gators, and those are the people that I want to shut up. I mean, speaking as a fan here for a moment, those are the people that I want to shut up. Unfortunately, right now, here's Georgia's relationship to Alabama. for the most part in the national media, no one's really even talking about that game taking place. Georgia, Alabama is not on the national radar right now. It's just not. Now, once you've eliminated 40% of the country, and all of a sudden there's a lot less games, then a lot more people are paying attention to it. But
isn't every game a regional game? Isn't every game a regional game
At this
now?
point, yeah, every game is a regional game with the South.
Listen, it may be a regional sport by the time this thing is all said and done.
So Georgia goes 2-0, beats Bama, beats Florida, and maybe something happens where the season goes off the skids. Are they going to get awarded the national championship for going 2-0 against Alabama and Florida?
I don't know, but listen, when Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier fought for the third time, it was two men fighting for the championship of each other. Sometimes fighting for the championship of each other is enough.
Yeah.
Georgia beating Florida again, even if it's not in a full season, that's just two teams fighting for the championship of each other. And trust me, I'm more than happy to keep that Gator Hater updater climbing after that.
If I could build like a sort of dream schedule here from a maximum entertainment standpoint, and I think Jeff mentioned, if you could guarantee 10 games, which we can't right now.
Right.
I would go Alabama week 1, Vanderbilt week 2, give you a week to recover, a cupcake, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Games, I guess 3 through 8, don't really care. Don't matter to me. Mm-hmm. Game 9, Jacksonville, Florida. Last SEC East game, sort of a SEC East championship. I think having that game at the end of the season builds maximum wow factor. Both those teams should still be pretty good, near the top of the polls.
Yeah.
Last week of the season, they play Arkansas. You get your cupcake. Then if there's hopefully no delays or postponements, you get your bye weeks. That means you get two sort of easy weeks between that big tough game against Florida and that SEC championship game.
I think that's an interesting point. And, Mike, the one thing that Ross Bjork said in the quote that I read a moment ago is they would try to preserve some end of the season rivalries if they possibly could. Obviously, the Iron Bowl is played the last Saturday. We don't think of Auburn necessarily as the second best team in the SEC West, although they might end up being that. But if the Iron Bowl is going to be its traditional date of the final game of the regular season, and you had some reasonable certainty that you could get to the final Saturday of the regular season, as Connor suggested, maybe that is an argument for playing Georgia-Florida, the last game as what you would assume is going to be an SEC East championship game.
I'll just say this. I'm really glad that Texas A&M's in the league because they got the biggest mouths of everybody when it comes to leaking and talking about what's going on in the league. It's always coming out of Ross Bork. It's always coming out of A&M.
He is very media friendly. I will agree with you on that.
Thank goodness that Texas is in the league. They love football as much as the Southeastern Conference. They belong there. And before I diss Missouri, I got to remind everybody they've won the SEC East twice. And the folks in Tennessee can't say that since 2007. And all they've done is show me. Now, if the SEC can ever figure out that they're in the West and they belong over there geographically, that doesn't speak very well for Greg Sankey and his professorial ways. You may want to correct that, Greg. It's kind of stupid to have a team in the East that's on the other side of the Mississippi River. At least I think they are. I hope I didn't embarrass myself.
Yeah, they are.
But they're pretty close.
St. Louis and Columbia's west of St. Louis.
That's right. I went up in the arts lab. You guys remember that? I came over my claustrophobia. I said, you know what? I'm covering Georgia, man. I got to overcome some fears. I got in that arch and overcame that claustrophobia. And then Kirby Smart and those dogs went down the road and overcame Drew Lock. He's going to be leading the Broncos to a Super Bowl here in the next few years, by the way.
There you go. It's Cover 4 Live, brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau. That's Mike Griffith, Jeff Santel, Connor Riley. My name's Brandon Adams. Good to have you with us. Really appreciate our friends at Georgia Farm Bureau for making it all possible. You can find them online. Take advantage of everything they have to offer you. GFBinsurance.com. More affordable home, auto, life insurance. They've got that for you. Doing great things in communities all across this state with all kinds of great agricultural programs. That's what Georgia Farm Bureau does as well. They are always the home team, and we're glad to have them as part of what we're doing here on Cover 4 Live, brought to you by Georgia Farm Bureau here today. All right, I want to talk about this for a moment. There's obviously a lot of chatter about the potential spring season in the Big Ten. Jeff Brom, the Purdue coach, has talked about this. It seems like some other forces around the league seem to be wanting to embrace the idea of it even more. Greg Byrne, the Alabama athletic director, was also asked about that this week. And here's what Byrne, the Alabama AD, says with the possibility of a spring season in the SEC. He says there has been some, but not a ton of discussion on a spring season. We're focused on our plans for this fall. Our goal is to play this fall. We have adjusted a lot since March, and we will continue to evolve and adjust as necessary. So, guys, I don't want to be negative here for a moment, but it seems fair to ask this question. With a spring season being strongly considered by at least one league, if not the Pac-12 as well. I haven't heard as much about them in their spring season talk. But But if it's being strongly considered in other leagues, do you think if something terrible happens, the SEC can't play this fall, what's the chance the SEC tries to play this spring? Jeff, what do you think?
I think the SEC will try to play in November, December, January, February, March, April. I think that's probably what's going to happen there with the SEC. I just, when we were talking about that topic earlier, Brandon, the thing that struck me was, let's say the SEC and the Big 12 and the ACC make it happen. They get it done. They play a full schedule. Is college football broken? I think it's broken, because what are you going to do in the spring with with the schools that decide to sit out, the Pac-12 and the Big 10? I just don't know what becomes of that. But to stay on point, I just think the SEC is going to keep trying until they're told it's just not feasible. I think plans have been made for the SEC to have a model to play all throughout the fall until things worsen or until things get better.
Connor, what do you think?
I think the important word there is trying. And I like, for example, I like today that after I bet if you asked every Big Ten coach and Pac-12 coach if they wanted to have and try and have a season, they would have said yes. I think we've already seen that with guys like Scott Frost and Ryan Day. And what I like about what Jeff Brom and his plan that he put out there, I don't know how feasible it is, but I like that he's trying at least to make it happen. And I think the frustration with the Big Ten and the Pac-12 already saying we're not going to have fall sports before kids even get back on campus is that it just seems like they're not trying to sort of have a fall season. And as Jeff, I think, very eloquently stated, I believe that the SEC, they're going to try and have a season if they have to delay it in October, November, December, January, February, and April, in March as well. I believe that the SEC to the bitter end is at least going to try to have a season. Now, I don't think they need to be worrying and focusing so much on spring plans right now. I think they need to be fully focused on trying to make sure that a fall season can work and get off the ground.
Mike, I want your thoughts on this. Let me follow up because Connor and Jeff both said the same thing. So how much could you delay a fall season before it's not a season anymore? In other words, right now you're currently slated to play SEC Championship December 19th. You've only got 2 open dates built in between September 26th and that time. Let's say you have to keep moving games back, and all of a sudden it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks that you've lost. At a certain point in time, have you lost the rhythm of the season and you have to say this no longer counts as a season, or can you just keep pushing it back until you get it done?
I think it depends. I think it depends if you get it started. If you get it started and you're able to keep it up and go, and you have to sort of delay and stop it in the middle, I think then it becomes sort of tough to sort of try and restart and start or stop again. But if it's just, hey, let's see another 2 weeks of data and see how things turn out there, I think that's maybe a little bit easier.
Mike, what were you about to say?
How in the world can these academians in the Pac-12 and the Big Ten justify bringing students on campus, but now allowing players that would be tested 3 times a week to pursue their ambitions and dreams? Can you imagine if it was turned the other way around and they said, yes, we're going to have football, but we're not going to have anybody on campus? The uproar that would cause, but instead it's the other way around. It's the students that you're bringing on campus that aren't tested, that haven't gone through these thorough physicals that the football players have. I mean, this is the most ass backwards things I have ever seen in my lifetime. These academians have completely outthought themselves, because guess what, guys? Here's a news flash. Even if there's no football, COVID-19 is not going away. It doesn't mean that the players can't get it. It just means they won't be tested 3 times. It just means they won't spend 95% of their time around 100 other people that are tested, that are screened, that have gone through extensive physicals. The most logical thing to protect the players is to move forward with a season. And BA, don't tell me about the optics, because if you want to talk about optics, I saw a lot of guys laying on the turf with concussions. I see a lot of crippled people walking around. I see paralyzed people in hospitals. But now we're suddenly going to worry about the 1 out of 216,000 people in that age group. Never mind that we're talking about elite athletes. In the general 18 to 24-year-old age group, 1 out of 216,000 has a chance of dying from COVID-19. If you were to inject athletes into that, I would venture to say that number would grow even further. But we're going to let that percentage tell us that the juice isn't worth the squeeze, as we let in tens of thousands of untested college students on our campus and take their tuition money and expose them to professors that are in risk groups. It is preposterous.
Well, my response to that is I am in favor of scrutiny for the various conferences in terms of how they're bring their players back. In other words, I do think the standard has got to be higher than just buyer beware to the players. Hey, you knew the risk when you signed up. I think the standard has got to be higher than that. But the point, Mike, that I do agree with you on is I think that there's been probably somewhat an appropriate level of scrutiny for college football's attempt to return. In terms of academia's attempt to bring students back to campus, not nearly enough scrutiny. Now, that's probably because there aren't Cover 4 live shows that talk about the academic world the way we talk about the athletic world. That's probably got something to do with that. I mean, I heard an anecdotal example today, the fact that Michigan State is still going to have intramural sports. At least that's what the internet says, that Michigan State's still going to have intramural sports. There is such a nonsensical rhythm to the way all of this has been handled. Big Ten teams still practicing and working out, still maintaining a 20-hour work week, doing everything but playing the games. There is a part of this that, and listen, various people have different feelings with the coronavirus. You can go 1,000 different places on the internet and see an example of that. But this ought to be the one thing I think that everyone can agree with. There's a lack of consistency with the way the teams that postponed, the conferences that postponed their season this week. There is a lack of consistency with the way those universities themselves are handling all of this, and I do think that's a little worrisome.
Well, I think in that, and bringing up that some Big Ten teams are still practicing, I believe Nebraska and Michigan were still, even on the day of that the Big Ten announcement came down, they were. I think it shows maybe the disconnect there between the university, the academia level, the university presidents, board of trustees, whoever are making those decisions, and the athletic directors, the coaches, the players themselves. Look, there have obviously been a few players to opt out, but the overwhelming, majority that we have at least seen, and certainly within Georgia, to our knowledge, no one has opted out yet. They still want to play and have a college football season. And I think part of that, it just comes from who necessarily is making the decision in this argument, and how I think important athletics are to sort of certain university presidents and universities themselves, because while it's easy to say, hey, we have big sports, they matter here, the reality is some of these schools and academic institutions, sports are not nearly as important as the academic aspects themselves.
Jeff, let me bring you on this, because I've actually asked both Mike and Connor this on Dog Nation Daily this week, and I'm curious to get your opinion on this. We have seen Ron Corson, the Georgia sports science expert, speak to reporters as recently as a few days ago. The Alabama guy has been very active on Twitter, arguing on behalf of the plan that his school has in place and all this. If sports science experts in the various SEC schools say, we think it's healthy enough to play, you personally, do you trust them to get it done?
I do. I think that's a simple answer for me. I think Brock Vandegrift told the AJC something pretty insightful because he didn't get out of his comfort zone when he was talking. They asked him that question about, is it safe enough to play this season? And Brock Vandegrift basically said, I don't think I'm qualified or mature enough to really give an accurate assessment on that. What I do know is that I trust the people above me, the coaches and the administrators, and those in charge of high school football to make that decision for me. And that's a high schooler's view. That's a high schooler's view of everything. But you got to remember, all these players, they do have the ability, like you said before, Brandon, to opt out if everything feels wishy-washy. You see what's happening today with Florida State and all those players kind of ringing the bell about some things that they think is inappropriate going on with reporting and attitudes with COVID-19 in the program. To me, like all this stuff, it's hitting home for me, guys, because I sent my kids to school last Monday, and I guess the first week everybody was crossing their fingers, and the second week at Woodstock High School, they developed 14 cases, and another 15 needed to be pulled out of school for testing and tracing and monitoring. So they decided to, go back to distance learning and online learning until the end of the month. Naturally, where my mind goes with this is that's what every educational academic is going to do with Department of Public Health influence, is they're just going to revert back to distance learning. And I think you can't get a bubble in college athletics, but I think maybe to me, the theory that's germinating in my head, some sort of photosynthesis, if you will, about what's going on all across this land is there's probably if you ask me what's the most likely way the SEC gets all 10 of those games, it might be a situation where you can bubble the players in each SEC school just a little bit by remote learning.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Connor and I actually talked about this off the air today of, if you want to make the stipulation that you couldn't bring players back to campus if the regular students weren't going to come, well, now that the regular students are back and crawling all over each other, can you now have the players be online only as a way of kind of keeping them somewhat quarantined off? Now, based on what I've read about the disease, and gosh knows I'm not a doctor, but it's that close quarters in which they live that's still going to be a problem, which is not the case necessarily for high school students, although they could potentially be living with large families. But yeah, I think that's an overall pretty good point. Let me push pause on all this right now. It's our Cover 4 presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Let's move into Cover More and give folks a chance in our comment section, both Facebook and YouTube, to weigh in on all this. Connor, did you want to follow up on what Jeff was saying while we're pulling up the comments here?
I think Jeff and you both hit the nail on the head there, and I think if we want to see an SEC, if we want to see an SEC season, if we want to see a college football season, I think the sooner that maybe these universities agree to go to remote learning or virtual learning, while that's sort of not part of the academic experience or the ideal college experience, I think the sooner that happens, the better off chance there is of getting a completed college football season underway.
All right, James Crump on Facebook giving me some grief, and James is normally my guy, but he says, BA, I hope recruits are not watching this show because you're saying that Florida's a bigger game than Alabama. He gives me an LOL for that. Here's all I'm saying, and obviously part of the reason why you debate this kind of stuff is because different people agree, but I just don't think that Georgia has fully and completely put Florida in its rearview mirror yet. I think that's what you're playing for in 2020. Listen, far be it from me to tout the Gators. This team has been in the top 10 the last couple of years. Dan Mullen would say that last season's game, there was only a 7-point difference between Georgia and Florida. I don't believe that's true, but I also don't believe in an offseason in which so many people have predicted Florida to be better than Georgia that you can reasonably say that UGA has fully and completely vanquished them just yet. You win in 2020, there's no more argument for Dan Mullen. For now, I do still believe that Florida is a bigger game than Alabama, and even if other people disagree with that, I can't change my own opinion on that.
Yeah, and I think to argue on BA's side here, if Georgia beats Florida, it extinguishes that narrative that Florida is close or Dan Mullen is in the same stratosphere, which I think there are a lot of people out there, regardless of on-field results, will sort of make that argument. If Georgia beats Alabama this year, if they beat them, let's say once or even twice, I think, that Alabama narrative is not going anywhere. Sure, people will want to say, oh, Saban is done. He's on the last 3 holes of his career. He didn't pull a Colin Moriaka in Eagle 16 at the PGA Championship this past weekend. But until Nick Saban is out and gone and no longer the head coach at Alabama, that narrative around Alabama is still going to exist. Whereas I think the Georgia-Florida thing right now, Kirby beats them for a 4th year in a row, something that has not happened very often in this rivalry from Florida's perspective. I think that can go a long way in sort of establishing itself.
Antoine Middleton, Nick Vernon, both asking. Honestly, I have no idea where Mike went. He just sort of dropped out of the sky here. So I have no idea where he went. I do want to get Kelly Bridges' comment. Kelly asking Jeff, do you see players transferring to the SEC if they're not playing Pac-12, Big Ten? To me, Jeff, the problem on that has always felt like the number of available scholarships at a place like the SEC. Now, if it's a good enough player, there's ways to figure it out. But for the most part, there's just not a lot of available scholarships to go around.
Yeah, I think the word nefarious comes to mind because you got young men about to go to school. You've got people enrolling. You've got guys that would be transferring. If any smart SEC coach is operating his roster the way he should, he's got to be right at 84, 85 right now. So, yeah, how do you create room? Sure, you can cleverly deprocess a guy. You can process a guy. You can medically disqualify a guy. I think that's just really a bad look to do that in the age of COVID. Meanwhile, Pac-10, although it's not known for playing defense, and to a lesser extent the Big Ten, those coaches are touting spring ball, spring ball, spring ball. Come back. You get to play 9 games in the spring, and then you get to play another 10 games in the fall. You want to do that, right? You want to get developed fast for the NFL, and we can do that for you, buddy, with 2 seasons in 1 year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. By the way,
and by the way, Brandon, one more thing. I got to come back to this, man. I think you're thinking about punishing and penalizing Florida with that debate, and I understand why, more than elevating Georgia. The win that elevates Georgia is the Alabama win this year, man.
So, Connor arguing on my behalf a moment ago, there was one thing he said I somewhat disagree with. If Georgia could beat Alabama twice this year, that does change the Georgia-Alabama narrative. but one regular season win. You can't get revenge for December and January and September. You can't do that. So one win against Alabama does not do much to change the narrative that exists between Georgia and Alabama. But if you beat them twice, I do think that's a significant narrative alteration, which is one of the reasons why I think the Georgia-Florida game still remains so big. In a year when so much is being said about Florida, to think that you would beat Florida 4 years in a row, you'd beat Dan Mullen as Florida coach 3 years in a row, and going back to his last year at Mississippi State, when the Bulldogs were only a 3-point underdog in Athens, a game that many people expected them to win. Georgia's now beaten them beaten Mullen 4 years in a row. That changes the way that Mullen is seen by every analyst in the country. That is a significant storyline, narrative alteration. That's my feeling on that. But, Jeff, let me bring you a commenter back in here on YouTube who asked you this question. Biggest Big Ten recruits that Georgia has a chance to make hay with because of the cancellation? Is it as simple as talking about Donovan Edwards? I mean, who are the guys that Georgia wins with because of the Big Ten's postponement?
I would think a lot of the offensive line, a lot of the defensive linemen is where they'd have to look there. Donovan Edwards certainly is a name and a big time running back. But if we're talking, Connor, this is probably too old of a reference for you. Do you remember Wayne's World? Have you seen a GIF of that or anything like that?
Because I'm young does not mean that I'm not cultured. Of course I know with Wayne's World.
So here's the and Mike, you can knock back your big hefty pot of green tea as you hear this. But Brandon, if you're trying to be your Montgomery Burns dude and get the biggest, baddest possible recruit there, the name, my friend, is not Donovan Edwards. The name is Trayvon Henderson. That's the one you need to go after.
Ohio State running back commit. Fun to think about that. Mike, everybody wants to know, and I don't mean to get in your personal business, but where'd you go? Did you go to the bathroom? What were you doing?
He's on me. I was going to say, it felt a little hollow with no mic on the broadcast here for a second. Everybody
said you should know that people really like you because they were very worried where you went.
He's still on mute.
George Pickens did get suspended. Nobody got hurt. I mean, it was amazing.
Mike, nobody can hear you. He may be saying like this is like that moment in like Forrest Gump when he's like he's going to unmute himself. That's all I got to say about that. Like he's just solving the world's problems. We can't hear what he's saying.
There's a thunderstorm here. The power went out. So
are you serious?
The whole house went dark, and had to hope for some of that Oconee County backup power. And thank goodness it came back. So I was able to get it back, and glad to be back listening to you, BA.
That is awesome. Dear.
No, it's not.
No, I'm sorry. I'm trying to do 500 different things. I'm reading the comments. I'm sorry that your power's out, but I'm glad that you're having a good time. All right, we just got to get ready to wrap up. The wheels are coming off here. Anybody got a final thought? Anything they want to say? Mike, since you were gone for a couple of minutes, what's your final thought?
I don't the lightning, the bolts. I mean, I think we said it all. I don't think anybody could say it any better than what we've done for the last hour and 16 minutes.
Well, let me give a huge thanks to Georgia Farm Bureau for being a part of this and an apology for what the last 5 minutes have been like. But nonetheless, we really appreciate that. I got Dog Nation Deli tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Jeff Sintel making an appearance there. We'll talk some UJ recruiting. Mike Griffith will continue to follow all the twists and turns of various conference announcements, how that impacts the league. We care about the SEC as it's off and rolling for the upcoming season. Georgia practice about to begin. A lot of good Dog Nation coverage of that. Connor Riley will be a big part of that, of course, too. Thanks for being here for Cover 4 Live, presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Have a great evening. We'll see you back here next Thursday, 6 p.m. for another edition of the program. Have a great night, everybody.